Well, hello and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful sunny afternoon. At least it's beautiful where I am in Ottawa for our monthly snack and chat. Today we're going to be speaking with someone I am a big fan of, occupational therapist Janet Carioni, who will be sharing tips, strategies, and engagement in a meaningful discussion about the transition for back to school. So my name is Nancy Lockwood. I am the Director and Practice Lead for the AFCA Family Supports Program at Adopt for Life. Adopt for Life is a nonprofit charitable organization that provides peer support, community, education, advocacy, and awareness to the adoption, permanency, kinship, and customary care communities across Ontario and even beyond. Now, before I formally introduce Janet, I just want to pause for a moment and acknowledge the lands we are situated on today. I reside in the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people, which is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations, and as a first step toward improving our own understanding of local Indigenous people and their cultures, to recognize and acknowledge the historic and ongoing devastating effects of colonialism and racism in the name of assimilation in Canada, and to consider how we can each in our own way action forward in the spirit of truth, reconciliation, and collaboration. Now, we want this to be an engaging and interactive chat, so please feel free to ask questions or make comments in the chat. If you're happening to watch this later as the recording, not the live Facebook event, you can still leave some comments or questions and those will be monitored as well. We just want you engaging with all the content today. So now I'd like to introduce Janet Carioni. Janet works collaboratively with school teams as an embedded occupational therapist with the Ottawa Carleton District School Board. Her clinical practice is shaped by her curiosity and continuous learning about the neurobiology of prenatal and childhood trauma and nurturing growth. Janet is also an adoptive mother journeying through the teenage years with her two sons. And I just want to add, on a personal level, I've known Janet for quite a while. We used to work together. We helped to launch the Fetal Alcohol Resource Program here in Ottawa at Able To. We've both gone on to other ventures, but we've stayed in touch. We're friends, and I'm one of her biggest fans. So, Janet, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you. It's a big honor to be here and to share the screen together with you again, Nancy.
Fun to be together again. And this is such a timely topic. We were just chatting before we came on live that for some families, this is an exciting time preparing for back to school. For others, their children might be having a lot of anxiety, concerns. And we know that, as you say, occupational therapists are your friends, that you have a lot to offer to us in advice. So we have some questions prepared for you. And as well, there will be questions coming along in the chat. But to get us started, Janet, what are some of the common challenges faced by children during this transition back to school?
For my personal experience in our family, and also as an OT who's journeyed through this transition with so many families and students, it's the change, right? Regardless of it being a good change or a bad change, but you're going from two months of summer break, whatever that summer break looked like for you, whether it was going to day camps, staying at home, traveling all over the place, adjusting to different time zones, whatever it is. But then you have that shift to back to school where you have that school schedule. You've got to get up in the morning, whatever it is that you need to do for your school day. When you're sitting there at school, there's this huge cognitive load that is placed on you that you don't typically experience in the summer months as well. So there's this big change. And then it's not just change for our kiddos, it's change for us, like caregivers, for parents. I even think for myself, I haven't, other than a couple of morning meetings that I've had, I haven't needed to rely on my alarm clock in the morning for 2 months. But just even anticipating starting next week, that I have these morning things I've got to do for work and get up, that I've got to start setting the alarm again. That's the same thing for our kids. And then even chatting with families about changing of bell times, going from whether it be like your elementary school to intermediate school and then to high school. For some, they were so used to going to school at a school start at 9:15 and then shifting to a school start of 8 a.m. Like that's a big transition too. So it's just change. Everything is changing.
Yeah, good point. And especially those teenage years too, where their bodies seem to want to sleep in, right? And maybe
Exactly.
having that earlier start time. So how can parents and caregivers support their children during this transition phase?
One of the things that I find definitely helpful, and I ask my boys about this too. Right? I said, Mom's going on to do this chat, and what are some tips that you would give? So my boys are heading into grade 9 and 10, and over the years we have, as a family, done various things. I know when I worked at a children's treatment center, supporting that transition for families as well, going from like preschool into the school years. And now that I am an OT within a school, looking at this transition planning too. Like one of them is get familiar again with the school building, whether it be if you typically walk to school, start doing that as part of a a daily walk routine with your family as well. If you are the type of family that goes for a walk in the evening after dinner or partway through the day, but refamiliarize yourself with that route to school. Play in the playground or in the schoolyard again. If your child is going from that change, a lot of the schools, they'll have the primary yard and the older student yard and the kinder yard. Get used to those different schoolyard kind of configurations as well. If you made plans in advance, so last school year, of being able to go into the school for a tour, sort of that last week. A number of school boards and school districts do a transition time. Emails, I know here in Ottawa, emails went out to families this week saying if your student, your child is someone who needs some additional transition to school planning, that there are some designated days and times that you can go for a tour of the school on the inside. So these are just some tips that I have found that are helpful, and also get back into the routine of a school day, of having breakfast in the morning and lunch, if it's a balanced school day where you have 2 nutrition breaks, or is it a traditional lunch where you have a lunch break in the middle, and then also like the timing. Sometimes you only have 20 minutes to eat your meal, or you have a half an hour or 10 minutes, depending. Like start getting used to some of those parameters that are placed on us when we're within a school day structure. So those are just some kind of tips to.
Well, that's so interesting. And if we look at it from a teacher perspective, do you have some strategies you'd suggest for teachers to help their students with that transition?
Absolutely. I think one of the biggest ones is get to know your student, right? And some teachers, actually, I'm going to show this great little book. There's an FASD and Me book that is available through Adopt for Life, and you can download it for free as well and print it off. I have the printed version, the very first edition. But over the years, I have helped with families doing a variety of different all about me. Like, what are some of the things that your child enjoys, that they like to do, their strengths? What are some areas where they would need some help with? And this is something that's more so with my younger son, but he has prepared like a Google Slides, a PowerPoint presentation that he shares with his teachers. And he did this for grade 7 and 8. And, we talked about if he wants to do it again for grade 9, it's just a little presentation that is shared with his teachers in advance. The things that help him when he's learning and things that are not so helpful for him.
That's developing advocacy skills in him too. That's a really neat idea.
And absolutely. And you can simply just Google All About Me one-pagers, and teachers have a wealth of these as well. And even within the board that I'm at, we have sort of a template that we share with teachers. And what I find really helpful is depending on the age of the student, whether it be you send it home and have parents fill it out together with the child, that you work on it together in the classroom, you have students work on it. And this is actually a really neat thing. These one pagers that all about the student, and teachers will place this in a binder alphabetically. And even when supply teachers come in, or student teachers come in, or when there's staff changeover, or volunteers in the classroom. And this is something that they can flip through and get to know the students as well. Really, what I try to encourage with teachers is, rather than spending the time and energy to come up with like reward systems or token plans for your students, spend the time and energy to get to know your students, to connect with them, find out what they like to do, what they enjoy doing, and then connect with them through conversations and getting to know them that way, as opposed to spending the time to come up with a reward or an incentive to get engagement from your students. It's really getting to know them and connecting with your students. I hope that makes sense.
Oh, it does. That's such good advice. And just a reminder too, if you go on the Adopt for Life website, there is a section on the whole FASD and Me resources, and you can download the worksheets that can be filled in from the website. It's available in French as well. Now, can you share some effective strategies you recommend, Janet, or tips that can help children cope with the transition? I was chatting earlier with you. I had one child who just loved the start of school, loved to get all the back to school supplies. And then the other one was so anxious, I would buy the supplies, put them in the backpack and just give it to them on the first day. And we know it's so individualized, but do you have some general tips for helping them with that sort of initial coping?
The first one I'm going to start with is actually validate what your child is anxious about or excited about. Like, so often when we and I've been guilty of this too, right? And there's even ads going on the radio right now about the back to school, and it says, don't be afraid, don't be scared. But rather than that, let's validate that this child is feeling anxious, that they are feeling nervous, and talk through that, acknowledge it, and give space for our child to feel that, but also knowing that they can come to me, that I can be that safe person, or, who are those connections that you have at school who are the safe people for you there as well. And then, some other tip. I already talked about like that practice piece, like even practicing packing a lunch and unpacking a lunch. Can you get into those containers? What even you pack in your lunch? Is it water bottles, juice boxes? Become familiar with those types of containers and packaging, and how you're going to eat and what you're going to eat. And a big one for me, and I sit on my pedestal for this one, but it's sleep.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, well, I learned a lot from you about sleep and sleep hygiene. I remember not even understanding what it is. Tell us a bit about sleep.
Yeah, sure. So as we know, our brains, regardless of our age, even in the advanced ages of 40 plus, right? We need sleep. Our brains, plus, and all the decades, but we need sleep in order to function. And unfortunately, we build and develop habits that kind of lead to poor sleep. Anything from, and I am absolutely guilty of this, is being on my phone in my bed in the glow of my phone, falling asleep. And we know from research that the actual blue light and all that does not aid in our ability to have a good quality sleep. And so leading into school, think about, the age of your child, whether it be a 4-year-old all the way up to our 18-year-olds. Think about how much sleep they need in order to best function, and then kind of work from there. So if I've got to get ready for, to leave the house by 7:30, and then I need this amount of time to get my breakfast, have my shower, get dressed, what time do I need to wake up? And then what time should I be going to bed at night? And really start working through that transition. One of the biggest things that I see when it comes to school, especially when I'm with the students that I work with in particular, is they don't get enough sleep, whether it be from that routine of sleep and just staying up really late, or maybe there's a tech addiction and getting them off their video games and their phones at night is really tough. Or it could just be the way of the family structure and environment, or all those extracurriculars that our students are involved with in the community, and they don't get home until 9 o'clock at night, where it's very late to be able to wind down and go to sleep. So when we talk about sleep hygiene, not just the bedtime that you go to, but what helps you in your own regulation to get to that place that your nervous system is ready to shut it down and go to bed. So it could be, I definitely recommend turning off the TV, computer, video games at least half an hour before you plan to go to bed.
Right.
And then, maybe for your child, it's having a bath with bubbles and getting into their cozy pajamas, doing their teeth brushing, and then reading a story together. That is that consistent sleep hygiene routine, and then having a same bedtime as much as possible. So that's when we're talking about sleep hygiene. It's just helping your nervous system get to that place of sleep. Yeah.
Well, and so many of the families that we work with, or young people we support too, have neurodevelopmental disabilities, and that can also impact sleep. Can you discuss that a bit too?
Yeah, definitely. And so when a lot of the work that I did specifically with sleep was working with the FASD population and looking at the sleep data from sleep studies. And the research has been consistent. So I'll talk specifically about FASD, but then in general as well. But we know with FASD, when that brain has been prenatally exposed to alcohol, the structures in the brain and the patterns of sleep. So we do go through different patterns of sleep, and we need to cycle in and out of those different cycles throughout the night in order to get good restorative quality sleep. What we know with that prenatal exposure to alcohol is that the sleep cycles are disrupted, the quality of the sleep is disrupted, and for some, not everyone, but the production of melatonin is also impacted. And melatonin is that natural hormone that we need in order for our bodies to go into that sleep stage. So, working very closely with a physician who understands what those needs are for your child, because there are things that can help. It is definitely something that with the families that I work with, not just with the diagnosis of FASD, but various different other neural differences, as well as other disabilities where sleep is greatly impacted. It's not an easy answer for sure. And it takes time to figure out what works best for your child. What sleep environment do they need? Even does it need to be completely dark in that room? Right. Door open, door closed, temperature. Does it help? I have one child who needs to have 4 layers of blankets at all times. And it has to be in a very specific order and tucked in just right. And then I have another one where the blankets go flying off the bed and rarely will be tucked under as blankets, right? So it really, you need to figure out what your child's sleep needs are, as well as what helps them get to that place of sleep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, thank you. I was also just thinking too, Janet, when you mentioned the part about the routines, getting used to the lunchbox. I remember, how when we talk about being a behavioral detective and trying to figure out anxiety, I've worked with a few young people where it was all about that locker combination. And I even remember that going into high school. Am I going to remember my combination? And sometimes it's just something as simple as that, as you were saying, just to get the conversations going and figure out what are the things that they might be worried about or fixated on.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you get to that place where they're able to feel safe to share that information, then you come up with the strategies, right? So if it is a locker combination, there are so many other types of locks. It's not the left, right, left anymore, where we can figure out something that's going to be successful for the student. So often we see the external behavior and we jump to, well, they're just avoiding it, or they want to get away from it, or without digging deeper. And we really do need to dig deep and figure out and ask, like, hey, buddy, like, what is it? What are you feeling? And hearing about the locker combination, that's what's making me really nervous. Then let's talk through that. And it really is about taking time. And that's also when I speak with teachers as well, is rather than being so quick to judge or to assume what that behavior is about, take the time to ask the student and ask the child, what is it? And then once we know, we're able to figure things out together. And if I can't figure it out with you, I'm going to tap on someone else's shoulder and say, hey, can you help me find some ideas that might help my friend here with some of the things that they're having a hard time with.
Oh, such good advice, Janet. Now, I know a lot of the work that you do and that occupational therapists do are to support sensory issues. So let's just talk about things from a sensory perspective. How can we help children who have difficulties processing sensory information with the transition back to school?
Fantastic question. Before I dive into this, is just to, a quick overview is we have 8 senses. Not everyone knows we have 8, right? We have 5 senses where we take in info from our environment, right? We see, we hear, we smell, we touch, taste. We listen, and taste, right? But we also have our internal senses where we've got our proprioceptive system that really like how we take in information from against gravity and where am I positioned in space. We have our vestibular, that's like my balance. And then we have our interoception, that's my internal feelings and being able to know what these fluttering that's happening in my chest. What is that all about? Is it because I just ran up the stairs? Am I nervous? Am I excited? Like, what is my body telling me with how it's feeling and what's going on inside my body? So, we have to have a good understanding of all of that for our kiddos, especially when heading back to school. And where I like to look at with kids and with students is I kind of call it my my go-to list for how do we promote sensory health, right? We've got to look at sensory nourishment. What are the things that feel good for you? Is it soft, fluffy fabrics and just being able to hold on to that? So then I'm going to give you more of that. So we're going to do so much of that stuff that feels good. We're going to nourish your sensory system. And then also trying to figure out what are the things that feel really icky for you? What's yucky? And then let's protect that. So we look at sensory protection, or is it loud sounds? So maybe we're going to try to find other ways to dampen those loud sounds for you. Maybe it's the bright lights. Maybe our kids and our students can't tell us what's going on, but we can sort of see it from their body language and how they respond and react in certain situations. So we're going to try to work together and find strategies on how we provide sensory protection. And then the last one is that sensory break. We all need to take a break. It's, even just before jumping on this call, we talked about what are some of the things that we do with this transition back to school. As parents or caregivers, we've sent our kids back to school on that first day where the house is child free. What do you need to do with that break? And it's same with our kiddos. What do they need to do? Because our world, we can't stop the sensory information from coming at us. And for some of us, certain types of sensory input is just too much and too overwhelming. And we may do the best that we can to hold it in as much as possible throughout our school day, whether it be in the kindergarten classroom, out on the yard, as a high school student, bumping around in the hallways between classes. We can't get away from certain sensory stimulus. So we need to figure out ways to get a break from that too. It could be for a high school student that perhaps they are allowed to leave class a few minutes before the bell goes so that can go from that one classroom to the next period classroom when the hallways are empty. Or for that student to transition at the start of the day into the classroom, into the school when the halls are less busy, or even after the bell has gone and everybody else has gone in and they've been able to be in the yard for just 5 more minutes on their own and then transition in after everyone has made their way into their classrooms. So think of when you can take the breaks. And if you can't do that, maybe it's going for a drink at the water fountain, or can you take this attendance booklet to the office, things like that, or return this book to the library, whatever it is, but having that opportunity just to take a break, to get out of that classroom and to get away from all that sensory stuff that's coming at you.
Yeah. And also, so often our kids come home and that's when it all comes out,
Oh, yes,
right? Because they
absolutely.
held that together. And we need the schools to also understand that that doesn't mean home isn't a good place. It may be, it's because it's the safe place.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's the the term is slipping my mind right now, but I've talked about it before. It's that restraint collapse that happens after school. Yeah. You've held it all together and you come home and you just let it go. And so some of the things that we can do as a home, and and I get it, like you see those Pinterest boards and the TikTok videos of the perfect after school where you've got the cubbies at home that are labeled and your child puts everything away and it's neat and tidy and they get straight to their homework. For some of our kids, that's not realistic. We need to give them that break and allow them to have that break. And it could be, jumping on the trampoline. That's what they need. I know after, even as adults, we've driven for 6 hours to go visit family in the Toronto area. And then we've come back to Ottawa. And I know my partner will just crash on the couch. He just needs that break. Right? And there's times where I'll come home from work and I just need to take a break, right? We have to respect that our kids might need to do that, because if we don't give them that break and we put that demand, okay, did you unpack your school bag, put your lunch bag away, and we're on them with all these to-dos and these lists, they've had that all day at school. They may just explode in our faces, and then we get upset with that, right? We have to allow that chance for that restraint collapse to find its outlet, a safe outlet, whatever that may be.
And what are ways that we can support our children and youth with the sort of social emotional side of all of this transition?
Oh, that's such a tough one too. Like, it's finding, and I get stuck here a little bit more so because I think of my kids, right? When I think of my kids, and where those struggles fall into place too. Like, you have students and kids who are social, outgoing, extrovert butterflies that are surrounded by their friends all summer. They have kids coming over, they're going over to other kids' houses. And then you have those others who are a little bit more introverted or have a harder time with those social relationships. And perhaps they spent all summer not seeing others from school, and then making that transition back to school. What I can say here is validate it, respect it, and honor it. That your child may not be looking forward to going back to a classroom of whether it be 10 students, 30 students, and having to navigate all of those social interactions. Maybe last school year, socially was really tough. That'll, like, a lot of things happen. There are certain ages and stages in our children's development that are a little bit more challenging than others around navigating that social interaction piece. Like, the best thing we can do as the person at home is to be the safe place that our children can come to at the end of the day and also at the start of the day, where we can kind of help charge their batteries to enter that place.
Yeah, we actually have a question from the community. So Janet, for kids who have varying sensory profiles, such as sensory seeking or sensory avoidant, it can be hard to get others to understand when a child's needs are different than expected. Do you have any tips or suggestions on helping others understand that sensory profiles aren't always the same all the time?
Yes. What I do when I deliver training on sensory health and, how do we provide a sensory safe environment, where I start, especially, I've been doing this for a number of years, working within schools and doing professional development, is I start by exploring our own personal sensory selves and our own personal sensory beings. So, when you come home, are you a slippers kind of person, bare feet, socks? Like, what do you like touching your feet? What about the types of things that you wear? Are there noises that just irritate you? Or how do you like working in your environment infused office space? Sorry, not environment, the fluorescent lighting, or do you prefer to have the windows open, right? So I get the teachers into a place of actually recognizing that every single one of us who are living here on earth, we are sensory beings, and we can take things and not take things. There's things that feel good for us and things that just really irritate us. And then at the start of the day, end of the day, depending on the other stresses in our life. And again, I like to start for ourselves as adults, and I often will share the example with wool. I used to love wearing wool and cashmere sweaters, and I had an entire wardrobe full of them. I kind of hit a point in my life where the itchiness, it sort of hit me in my 30s, but the itchiness was driving me nuts. And sometimes I could start getting it over my head, and then I'd have to throw it right back off because I could not stand the way it felt. And just imagine if you're sitting in a classroom or in a meeting, a board meeting or a staff meeting, and you are wearing something where the tag is bugging you or the fabric is bugging you, and you need to pay attention and focus and listen. Almost impossible, right?
Right.
But then there's days where you wear something where there's nothing, there's no tags bugging you, and the fabric is just fine, and you're able to kind of function pretty well there at work. And that's where I like to kind of take this conversation especially with educators, is let's look at ourselves as sensory beings, and then recognize that our students are also sensory beings. Some days they have more in their kind of tolerance tank of sensory, kind of like a threshold, right? Like my threshold today is I can take more, and other days my threshold, if I just hear one more child chomping their food with their mouth open, right? Like there's that piece of where is your tolerance at in this moment, and our kids also will have that. Sometimes if math is a hard concept for them, and you're in the middle of a math lesson, you want to do as much as you can to protect them from all the sensory things that are not feeling good for them. We also have to think about what are the other demands that we place on students in the classroom. Like, is there a learning demand that we're placing on them? Is there a social demand that we're placing on them? And really be aware that some students in that moment may need their sensory nourishment bucket filled, and others may just need like a high load of sensory protection, and others may need to just take a sensory break and step outside for a couple of minutes. I hope that helps capture that question a little bit.
I'm sure it does, but feel free, if you're watching, to add more questions or comments in the chat. Another question for you, Janet. Are there particular age groups that require more attention during the transition phase? I can guess that one would be that transition to high school, which is difficult for everybody, or almost everybody. But what do you see in your work?
I'm gonna say, like, there are definite key periods, right, throughout our educational journey. There's the start to school, the JK, kindergarten, grade 1, and especially when we had a number of years of lockdown, right, and there were students who weren't doing preschool, or who hadn't come to kindergarten or grade 1 and entering grade 1. So that transition to starting school, whenever you're doing your school entry, is a tough one. Getting used to what are the expectations at school, what do we do at school? This is very different than my day at home. And then there's that transition from kindergarten to grade 1 is a big transition, because kindergarten really is a play-based learning environment. And then you enter grade 1 where you've got desks, chairs and tables that you need to sit at, right? And then another big transition, some of our schools will make the transition to the intermediate after grade 5, and middle school is grade 5, grade 6, grade 7. Others are grade 7, 8. Wherever that transition is from elementary school to your intermediate school, that's a big transition. And then absolutely into high school, where there's a greater degree of independence that we place on our students as well, and expectations that you're You're selecting your courses that we're not giving these to you. You get to pick what you want to do and when you do them. Getting to your classes in high school is when you're allowed to leave the school premises at lunch for the first time without supervision. And then another big transition, it's that what happens after high school. That is another huge transition that sometimes, we forget about it. Like, it's definitely on the forefront of my mind as I have a child who's going to be entering that transition phase in the next couple of years, is what's next after high school. So we've got some key points, but other key transitions are when you've moved communities.
Yes.
When you've switched schools, whether it be partway through the year, at the start of the year, if you've got even switching classrooms within the school year, within the same school, it absolutely happens. As in, expected enrollments, and some classrooms tend to end up having more students than others, and there's classroom shuffles that happen in the fall, right? So these are all big transitions that the key to kind of success there is that open communication between home and school on, feeling safe to share all the good and the bad of what's going on, and having that open communication back and forth between home and school. And another thing is not always just sharing the bad.
Right.
I think as parents, I'm not the only one here that when you see that phone number pop up from one of your kids' schools, my heart starts beating, or I'm anticipating bad news, right? Like, because it tends to be when the school calls, it's bad news. Let's keep that communication going where it's positive and bad news, where it's good and bad. So it's not always a feared call.
Yes. Yeah, such a good point. Now, how important is preparation before the transition? And so let's say we're supporting our loved one with a transition to high school. What are some of the areas that should be covered? What should we be thinking about to support them?
As much as you can in advance. So when I say in advance, it's in the previous school year. Because as we know, teachers are off July and August. And connect and communicate, whether it be with the guidance counselor, because most teachers and subjects and classes, we don't know who those teachers are going to be in September when we're in June. But typically the resource teacher, the guidance counselor, the principal, the administrator, principal, vice principal, make sure you're connected with someone with some type of transition planning. And this can be facilitated by the previous, the school that you're coming from to the school that you're going to, some type of transition planning. And then kind of put your hand up and say, I would like a tour of the school in advance of the first day of school. My child would really benefit from that. And as much as you can communicate that. And if you were not able to do that in the spring, to get those balls rolling, I will let you know that a lot of definitely the administrators, the principals and vice principals, and many of the guidance counselors and resource teachers, are able to do that week before heading into school. That's when schools sort of open up their doors for those transition tours, those school tours for the students who really need it, and really start reaching out. And that's when the offices are also staffed. When I say staffed, it's the office administrators who are there. So someone will be there to answer the call. That's what I'm saying. But if you try to make those connections during July and the first 3 weeks of August, there often won't be someone there. And then your email or your phone call, your voice message might get buried in the shuffle.
Right. Yeah. I see we only have about 5 minutes left. Okay. Time's going so quickly. But I'm just wondering, Janet, do you have any sort of more pointers or strategies or tips that we haven't covered for students or parents or teachers or anyone in the school support network for this time?
What I would say, like from within a school system, is you're not alone. Right? Like for teachers, for educators, for administrators to to know that they are not doing this alone, and that the connection and relationship that you have, not just with the students who are coming through your door, are important, but also with your colleagues, and know who you can call on and to tap into. And it's a relationship between not just the school and the student, but the school and the family and home as well. And also validating and honoring what parents are saying, what teachers are saying, because we know that the two environments, they're not the same. A classroom is not my living room, is not my home. And so things that are happening at school absolutely are happening at school, because that's what the school is experiencing. Things that are happening at home are happening at home. They may not be mirrored because the
Yes,
two environments are different, and the relationships that you have with the people in those spaces are different. So when you have a different level of safety with someone, or you have a different type of attachment with another person, what comes from you, what you give to the world is going to look different at school and at home. So we do need to respect and honor what's happening in those two environments. That's often what I see as a clash, and just being careful not to judge one another. Like, honestly, all of us, parents, teachers, school administrators, we are all doing the best that we can. Like, we wouldn't, in education, they would not have gotten into the profession if they didn't deeply care for children and educating children, right? They're doing the best that they can with what they've got. And also think of like their tank, their emotional tank, their sensory tank. They may have other things going on at home that we don't know about, that they are bringing to the job as well, that they're doing the best that they can with what they can bring. And it's the same thing with home. Like, our schools also have to respect and honor that parents, caregivers, loved ones, we are doing the best that we can for our kids. And there's going to be times where I've run out of steam as well, and I'm sinking, and I may not make the right decisions. I may not say things the most respectfully, but we have to give each other grace as well when we screw that up, because I know I've done that too many times.
Oh, well, it's been so wonderful to talk to you today, Janet, and how lucky the people in your board are to have you. I also want to remind our listeners today that if you are a member of the Adopt for Life community, you have your regional parent liaisons who can help with giving peer support for families and that back to school transition time. If you aren't a member of the Adopt for Life community but would like more information, you can write to us at info@adoptforlife, adopt4life.com. And I just want to thank you most sincerely, my friend Janet. It's been so fun to be with you again today. Good luck with your back to school. You have your own back to school with your children and your job. So thank you for taking time out today.
Thanks for having me on here, inviting me on, Nancy.
Well, our pleasure. We wish you all a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye, guys.